Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a subject that feels, at first glance, almost like a contradiction in terms.
It does, doesn't it?
We're talking about a figure who looked at the mundane, the boring routine of daily life, the office paperwork, the farm labor, the kitchen cleanup,
Yeah.
and saw it not as a distraction from spiritual life, but as the actual raw material for it.
It's a fascinating inversion of the typical narrative. Usually when we think of high spirituality or, mysticism, we think of leaving the world.
Exactly.
We think of mountaintops, deserts, or at least a quiet monastery behind thick walls.
We think of escaping the noise to find the silence. But our subject today, St. Josemaría Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, basically said, no, don't leave, stay right there.
Right, that noise, that stress, that broken photocopier.
That's your monastery.
Precisely. And for our deep dive today, we've pulled together a really comprehensive stack of sources to try and understand this man and his message.
Okay, so what are we working with?
Well, we're looking at critical historical editions of his major works, like The Way, which is known as Camino in Spanish. We also have transcripts of homilies he gave on university campuses, which are, they're incredibly dense with theology.
So not just simple talks.
Not at all. And then we have biographical notes, some private letters from the Spanish Civil War period, and even the papal decrees from his canonization.
And the mission for this deep dive is pretty clear then. We want to get past just the surface level biography and really understand the intellectual genealogy of this guy. Because he didn't just pop up out of nowhere, right?
And he would be the first to say that. He claimed he was rediscovering something very, very old.
What did he say? Old as the gospel.
And like the gospel, new. That's the phrase he used. So we're going to look at which saints and which church doctors might have influenced this really revolutionary idea that an ordinary lawyer or a shopkeeper could be just as saintly, and he meant that literally, altar-worthy saintly, as a monk in a desert.
It's a bold claim. It really is. So let's set the stage. Why does this matter to someone listening right now? Maybe they aren't even particularly religious, or maybe they are, but they feel like they're living a sort of double life.
Well, you just hit on it. That feeling of a double life is exactly what Escrivá diagnosed as a kind of spiritual disease. He even called it schizophrenia.
Not in the clinical sense, obviously.
No, not at all. In a spiritual sense, the idea that you have your real life Monday through Friday, which is secular and worldly, and then your spiritual life on Sunday, which is pious and totally disconnected from everything else.
The Sunday Catholic versus the Monday businessman.
Right. And his so what, the toolkit he offers, is a method to merge those two. It's for anyone who feels overwhelmed by that split. He's offering a way to find, really, the absolute highest meaning in the most ordinary tasks you can imagine.
Okay, that's a great setup. Let's get into the man himself, because to understand the message, you usually have to understand the messenger. We're getting to section 1.
Yeah.
The man from Barbastro.
So Josemaría Escrivá was born on January 9th, 1902 in Barbastro, Spain. And if you look at the early biographical sources, everything just screams normalcy at first.
No visions as a child, nothing like that?
No, not really. She wasn't born into some mystical, secluded environment. He was a normal kid in a normal town. But you start to see these sharp punctuations of hardship that really begin to shape him.
I read in the notes about something called presagios. That sounds mysterious. What was that about?
It is. Around the age of 15 or 16, he started feeling these presagios or presages. They were intimations, hints that God wanted something specific from him.
So not a clear voice from the sky.
No, and not an instruction manual. The sources describe it as just a persistent, nagging sense of being called to a mission that he couldn't yet define.
So he knows there's a job to do, but he doesn't have the job description yet.
Exactly. And this is interesting. He decided to become a priest not because he thought that was the end goal, but as the means to be available for whatever that something was.
Okay, so it was a strategic move, in a way.
You could see it that way. He figured, if I am a priest, I'll be in the best position to hear the call and act on it whenever it finally becomes clear.
So he's waiting for a message. But while he's waiting, his life isn't exactly a bed of roses. The family goes through some serious trouble.
Far from it. And this is absolutely crucial for understanding his theology of the ordinary. His family went through a severe financial crisis. His father, José Escrivá, was a merchant, and he went bankrupt.
The whole business collapsed.
The whole thing. Now, the sources really emphasize his father's honesty here. He didn't cut corners to save himself. He paid all his creditors, he liquidated his assets, and he essentially lost his own fortune to keep his name clean.
That's a heavy lesson for a teenager to watch firsthand.
It is. The family had to relocate to Logroño. And you have to think about that for a teenager. He watches his father, who's a good man, suffering the humiliation of bankruptcy and the day-to-day struggle just to put food on the table.
So this wasn't an abstract concept of poverty,
No, this was the daily grind of making ends meet, of counting pennies, of losing your social status in a small town.
which probably inoculated him against any kind of pie-in-the-sky idea that spiritual people don't have to worry about money or jobs. He saw that the struggle is real.
Exactly right. He saw the heroism in his father's quiet, dignified struggle. He realized that ordinariness, which includes financial struggle, was the setting for real virtue.
There's another detail from his childhood that's quite dramatic. The illness.
Yes. In 1904, when he was just a toddler, maybe 2 years old, he was given up for dead by the doctors.
Wow. What happened?
He had a very serious infection. The doctor actually told his father he won't last the night.
That's devastating.
So his parents, in what was really a desperate act of faith, took him on a pilgrimage to a local shrine, the Hermitage of Torre Ciudad. It was a rough journey, especially with a sick child. But against all medical expectations, he was cured.
So you have this mix of, miraculous intervention on one hand, and then this gritty, real-world hardship on the other, both shaping him from the very start.
It's a very powerful combination.
So let's fast forward a bit. He's a priest now. He's waiting for this thing that God wants from him. When does the other shoe finally drop?
October 2, 1928. He's in Madrid. He's on a spiritual retreat. And the sources say that while he was reviewing his notes, he hears the ringing of church bells in the city. And in that moment, the message of Opus Dei opened a path in his soul.
Opened a path. I like that phrasing. It wasn't just an idea he cooked up. He experienced it as more of a discovery.
He always insisted on that. He said he wasn't a founder in the sense of an inventor. He felt he was seeing something that was already there in God's will. He used the Latin word vidit. He saw it, whole and entire.
And almost immediately after this founding, history intervenes again in a big way. The Spanish Civil War breaks out.
It does. And this is a chaotic, incredibly dangerous time, especially for priests in Republican-held Madrid.
Right. There was intense persecution.
Extremely dangerous. Priests were being hunted down and killed. And this leads us to one of the most vivid anecdotes in the source material. His time hiding in the legation of Honduras.
This is a diplomatic building, right? So it offered some protection?
Yes, a fragile protection. He and a small group of his early followers were crammed into this building effectively as refugees. They couldn't leave. If they stepped outside, they could be shot. They were cramped, they were hungry, they were terrified. It was a period of forced inactivity.
Which must have been absolute torture for a guy who just realized he has a mission to change the world. He finally gets the download of what he's supposed to do, and then he's locked in a room.
Exactly. And this is where he develops a really powerful metaphor, the metaphor of the spring, or in Spanish, the muelle.
The coil.
Yes, a coiled spring. He told these young men who were just, climbing the walls with anxiety and frustration, look at yourselves like a coiled spring. You are being compressed right now. It's uncomfortable. It feels like you're being crushed.
I can imagine.
But he said this compression is necessary, so that when you are finally released, you will launch much farther and with much more force than if you had never been compressed at all.
That is such a powerful reframing of suffering. It's not just waited out and endured. This is accumulating energy.
It's active waiting. It's not passive. And that theme of active versus passive runs through his whole life and his whole message.
So eventually the war ends. He gets out, and he moves to Rome in 1946. Why Rome?
He wanted to be close to the heart of the church. He was convinced that this message of the universal call to holiness wasn't just for Spain, it was for the entire world. He wanted the institution, Opus Dei, to be approved by the Vatican to ensure its universality and its orthodoxy.
And he stayed there for the rest of his life.
He did. He lived there until his death on June 26, 1975.
And the sources mention a specific detail about his death, which I found fitting.
Yes, he died in his workroom, his office. He collapsed after looking at a picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe that he had in the room.
It's fitting, isn't it? He died basically on the job. He didn't die in a retirement home. He died with his boots on, so to speak.
Very much so.
And then, much later in 2002, Pope John Paul II canonizes him and gives him this very specific title, the Saint of Ordinary Life.
Which is the perfect bridge to the core of what that actually means. Let's move into section 2.
The core message. Okay, let's really unpack this universal call to holiness. Because today, if you tell someone you should be a saint, they might look at you funny, but they don't think it's, forbidden. But you're saying back then the mindset was different.
Well, it was very different. We have to understand this historical context. For centuries, there was a subtle and sometimes not so subtle glass ceiling on holiness.
Glass ceiling. How so?
Well, the thinking was if you really truly wanted to be holy, you became a priest, a monk, or a nun. You entered the religious state.
Yeah.
That was the path to perfection.
And if you were a lawyer or a farmer or a housewife?
You were the longa manus, which is Latin for the long arm of the church in the world. Your job was basically to pay, pray, and obey. You could be good, sure, you could be devout, but holiness, that altar-worthy, heroic sanctity,
That was for the professionals.
that was for the professionals. The prevailing thought was that the world, your job, your family, your finances, was something to be escaped from or at best endured. It wasn't the place for sanctification.
So the layman, the ordinary person, was essentially a second-class citizen in the spiritual economy.
Precisely. And Escrivá comes along in 1928 and just shatters that glass ceiling. He proposes something that at the time was truly radical, that the call to be a saint is universal, it's for everyone, and he didn't mean some kind of watered-down version of sanctity.
Right, he wasn't just saying be a nice person.
No, he was saying that the lawyer, the cleaner, the shopkeeper is called to the exact same degree of intimacy with God as the monk in his cell. There's a great quote from the sources where he says, "We have come to say that all the paths of the earth can be divine."
All the paths of the earth. That's incredibly expansive. That means Wall Street, Main Street, the farm, the factory floor.
It is, and he fights against what he calls clericalism regarding the laity.
What does he mean by that, exactly? Clericalizing the laity?
Well, it's the tendency that when lay people get really religious, they start trying to act like mini priests or mini nuns. They get obsessed with church politics, or they spend all their time hanging around the sacristy, doing churchy things.
I've seen that.
And Escrivá said, no, don't hide in the church. Your place, your battlefield, is in the world. It's in the laboratory, in the operating theater, in the barracks, in the university chair.
He wanted them to be fully in the world, not retreating from it.
He used the phrase passionately loving the world. He preached a very famous homily with that exact title. He argued that we have to find the invisible God in visible things. He said something very striking, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was. Either we learn to find our Lord in ordinary everyday life, or else we shall never find him.
That's a challenge. Because it's easy to feel godly when the organ is playing and the incense is rising. It's a lot harder when you're stuck in traffic or dealing with a difficult client.
It is, which is precisely why his focus on work is the absolute hinge of his whole system. And this brings us to section 3 in our outline.
Work as the hinge of sanctification. Love that image. A hinge is what allows the door to open. So how does work, my 9-to-5 job, open the door to holiness?
He used a Latin term for it, operatio Dei, which means work of God, but he didn't mean church work. He meant your work, your profession is God's work. But, and this is the absolute kicker, it's only holy if it meets certain conditions. It's not automatic.
Okay, so what are the conditions? I can't just show up to my desk and say, this spreadsheet is holy and be done with it.
No. He breaks it down into a really practical 3-step process. First, you have to sanctify the work itself.
And what does that mean?
It means doing it perfectly, or as perfectly as you can. It's about human perfection.
So competence.
Yes. You can't offer God botched work. His example was always, if you are a carpenter and you want to be a saint, you have to make a good table. If the table wobbles, it's not an acceptable offering to God. If you're a doctor, you need to study, keep up with the latest research, and be the best doctor you can be.
So professional competence is a spiritual duty that changes the stakes on your annual performance review.
Absolutely. He said you have to create human perfection as the foundation for the supernatural. And there's that wonderful anecdote you mentioned from the notes about the last stone.
Oh, I saw this. He said he loved the last stone more than the first stone.
Right. Think about it. In big public works projects, there's always a huge ceremony for laying the first stone. Politicians come, there's a ribbon cutting, photos are taken for the newspaper.
Right, fanfare.
A lot of fanfare, but the building isn't even close to being done. Escrivá said he wasn't interested in the first stone. He was interested in the last stone, the one that finishes the job, the final touch, which usually happens when no one is watching.
Finishing things well. That is rare. It's so easy to start projects with a lot of enthusiasm, but it's hard to finish them with that same level of care.
It is. So, step 1, do the job well. Step 2 is to sanctify yourself through the work. This means using the difficulties of the work, the tiredness, the difficult boss, the monotony, the failures, as a way to grow in virtue.
So the work becomes your spiritual gym.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's
Yeah.
where you exercise patience, fortitude, humility, charity.
Okay, and step 3?
You sanctify others with the work. Your work should be a service to society and an example to your colleagues. It becomes a platform for what he called apostolate, for helping others find God. If you work well and with integrity, you gain professional prestige, and you can use that prestige to be a positive influence.
There's a literary metaphor he uses here that I think is just beautiful. He talks about turning prose into poetry.
Ah, yes, the endecasílabos.
Explain that for us. What is an endecasílabo?
So, an endecasílabo is a hendecasyllable, a line of verse with 11 syllables. In Spanish literature, this is the classic meter of heroic poetry, of the great epics. It's the high art form.
It's like iambic pentameter for Shakespeare.
Exactly. And Escrivá would tell his students and followers, you are living the prose of each day, the dull, repetitive, sometimes boring routine. But with your love, with your intention of offering it to God, you can turn that prose into endecasílabos, into heroic verse.
That's profound. It's acknowledging that life is prose a lot of the time. It is boring sometimes. It is routine. The poetry isn't in changing the activity, it's in changing the way you do the activity.
Precisely. It's the alchemy of love. It transforms the material itself. You don't need to go looking for exciting things to do for God. You need to put love and excellence into the boring things you already have to do.
And this leads directly to the problem he is trying to solve, which we touched on earlier, that schizophrenia of the modern believer.
Yes, this is section 4, unity of life.
So he saw people living in these separate compartments. They had a religious compartment and a secular compartment.
And a thick wall between them. There was no door. He called this a double life, or spiritual schizophrenia.
The person who is righteous in church on Sunday, but cheats on their taxes on Monday.
Or even something less dramatic. The person who is kind and patient at Mass, but is a terror to their employees on Monday morning. Escrivá insisted on what he called unity of life. There is only one life, he said, made of flesh and spirit, and that whole single life has to be holy. You can't take off your Christian hat and put on your business hat.
He talks about the world itself being a temple.
Yes, in one of his famous homilies, he says, the nave of the church, the main body where the people sit, is the street, it's the library, it's the office, it's the kitchen.
So if the street is the nave of the church, then walking to work is.
It becomes a procession.
And working at your desk is.
The liturgy. He basically says there should be no switch you have to flip between praying and working. Work is prayer. He called it prayer in the body. If you offer it to God with the right intention and do it well, the action itself becomes a form of prayer.
I can absolutely see why this was so revolutionary. It completely democratizes spirituality.
Yeah.
But getting back to our intellectual genealogy mission, he claimed he wasn't inventing this. He said he was looking back. So who was he looking back to?
That's the perfect question. This brings us to section 5, the grandfathers of the message.
The influencers before influencers were a thing.
Right. His number one primary model wasn't the medieval monks as much as he respected and admired them. It was the early Christians.
The ones living under the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
Before Christianity was legalized?
Yes. He pointed this out constantly. The first Christians didn't wear special clothes. They didn't live in separate ghettos. They were, to an outsider, indistinguishable from their pagan neighbors in terms of their jobs and their dress. They were soldiers, merchants, slaves, aristocrats.
The only difference was their faith and their ethics.
Exactly. They changed the world from the inside out. They were the leaven in the dough. Escrivá wanted to recreate that exact dynamic. He often said that Opus Dei was simply meant to be the early Christians happening again in the 20th century.
But he also drew heavily on specific saints, right? St. Augustine's a big one.
A huge one. The Bishop of Hippo. What he really took from Augustine was the concept of the temple of living stones.
Tell us more about that.
Augustine preached about how when a physical church is built, we, the faithful, are the real stones. And stones have to be chipped and hammered and shaped to fit together properly in the wall.
And that chipping and hammering is life.
It's life. It's the suffering and the friction and the difficulties of ordinary life that are shaping us to fit into God's temple. Escrivá loved that image of construction, of building something beautiful out of rough material.
Okay, now I noticed in the notes he also talks a lot about St. Teresa of Avila and St. Ignatius of Loyola. Now these were capital R religious, a nun who reformed an order, and a priest who founded the Jesuits.
Yes, and this is where it gets very nuanced, and it's important to get it right. He admired them immensely. He called them peaks of holiness. He loved their human and divine dynamism. He even borrowed Teresa's term palomarsicos, little dovecotes, to describe his own foundations. But
That is a big but.
there's a huge but. He was crystal clear that their path was different from the one he was proposing. They left the world, or at least they formed structures that were distinct from ordinary civil society in order to follow God. Escrivá was saying, admire their intensity, emulate their love, but do not copy their lifestyle. He explicitly did not want his followers to be pseudo-monks living in the world.
He wanted them to be fully secular.
Yes. Secular in the proper theological sense, living in the seculum, the age, the world. He wanted them to be contemplatives in the middle of the world.
There's another saint that pops up constantly in his writings, and I feel like he's often overlooked. Saint Joseph.
Oh, Joseph is huge for Escrivá, absolutely central. He called him Father and Lord.
Why Joseph? What was the connection?
Well, think about it. Joseph is the ultimate saint of ordinary life. He wasn't a preacher. He didn't write any epistles. He wasn't a martyr in the public sense. He was a craftsman, a carpenter. He ran a small business. He was the head of a family. He lived with Jesus for 30 years in total hidden normalcy.
And the sources say Escrivá had a specific take on Joseph's famous silence.
Yes. So often Joseph is portrayed as this quiet, almost passive old man in the background of nativity scenes. Escrivá hated that image. He saw Joseph as young, strong, and incredibly active. He viewed Joseph's obedience to God not as a passive submission, but as an intelligent and active obedience.
Active obedience, what does that mean?
It means Joseph had to think. He had to plan. When the angel said flee to Egypt, Joseph had to figure out the logistics. He had to pack, find a route, protect his family, find work in a foreign country. Escrivá loved that. He saw Joseph as a man who used his brain and his professional skills to serve God's plan.
That makes Joseph feel much more relatable to a modern parent or worker. He had mortgages to pay, metaphorically speaking.
Exactly. And finally, of course, we have St. Paul, the runner.
The athlete.
Yes, Escrivá loved the sports metaphors in St. Paul's letters, running the race, fighting the good fight. For Escrivá, the spiritual life was an athletic contest. It required training, effort, strategy, and sportsmanship. And he always emphasized that we are fighting against our own limitations, our own laziness, our own pride, not against other people.
So we have the history, we have the models. But I want to get to the emotional core of this, because honestly, doing everything perfectly, turning all your work into heroic poetry, it sounds exhausting.
It does.
If I have to be a perfect worker and a perfect parent and a perfect spouse to be a saint, I can feel the anxiety rising already.
That is a very valid and very common reaction. And if Escrivá's message stopped at work hard and be perfect, it would be crushing. It would just be a form of spiritual perfectionism. But it doesn't stop there. This brings us to what he considered the foundation of it all, Section 6. Divine filiation.
Divine filiation. It's a fancy theological term. Can you unpack it for us?
It means, quite simply, the vivid, lived awareness that you are a child of God. But Escrivá didn't treat this as just a pretty poetic metaphor. For him, it was the great secret.
The secret that's mentioned in the introduction to his book, The Holy Rosary.
That's the one. He wrote that he wanted to whisper a secret in the listener's ear. You are a son of God. He believed this was an ontological reality, a fact of your being thanks to baptism. And the psychological impact of truly believing this is what destroys the anxiety you just mentioned.
How so? How does that work?
Because if God is your father, and not just a distant king or a stern judge, but a father full of tenderness, as the sources quote him saying, then why worry? Escrivá would say that a small child might trip and fall and get dirty, but the father is right there to pick him up, dust him off, and set him on his way again.
So the perfectionism, the striving to do good work, isn't about earning God's love.
Exactly. That's the key. You don't work well to earn your status as a child of God. You work well because you are already a child and you want to please your father. It completely changes the motivation from one of fear to one of love and confidence.
The sources mention a phrase that I absolutely love. Holy shamelessness. Santa desvergüenza.
Yeah, this is one of his classic trademark phrases. He draws this directly from observing the behavior of little children. Have you ever seen a small child ask their parents for something totally and completely unreasonable?
All the time. Can I have a pony? Can I have the moon?
And they aren't the least bit embarrassed to ask, are they? They don't worry about protocol or whether it's appropriate. They just ask because they trust the relationship. Escrivá told his followers to have that holy shamelessness with God, to ask for the moon, to admit their mistakes without getting bogged down in crushing guilt, but with the simplicity of a child who runs to his father and says, I broke this, can you please fix it?
That brings such a sense of freedom to the whole enterprise.
That's the other side of the coin. Freedom of spirit. Escrivá hated, and the sources use the strong word hatred, he hated tyranny in spiritual matters. He didn't want to create robots. He wanted free, responsible individual.
Which connects right back to the theology of work. You can't be a responsible professional and innovator if you're just a robot following orders. You have to have personal initiative.
Correct. He wanted people to act with personal freedom and responsibility. He famously refused to give his followers political instructions, for example. He would say, I will never tell you who to vote for. That's your job as a free citizen to figure out.
Which, given the intense political turmoil of the 20th century in Spain and Europe, was a very strong stance to take.
It was. He wanted them to be citizens of the city, making their own informed choices, not a block of voters controlled by a cleric.
We've talked a lot about his ideas, but we should talk for a minute about how he communicated them. Because his writing style is, well, it's unique. It doesn't read like a typical theology textbook.
Not at all. And that brings us to Section 7, the written legacy. The most famous example is his first book, The Way or Camino.
The book with 999 points. Why 999? Any reason for that?
Well, some have speculated it was his way of showing it wasn't a complete closed system, that the 1,000th point is your own life, what you do with it.
Yeah.
But the structure itself is aphoristic. Short, punchy, numbered sentences.
It feels like Twitter before Twitter existed.
It really does. It's very modern in that sense. But the tone is incredibly intimate. He says in the introduction something like, I'm going to tell you these things in confidence, as a friend, a brother, a father. It's designed to be read slowly, 1 or 2 points at a time, to provoke thought.
And the sources mention the gatica of his writing style.
Yeah, the gaitica. It sounds like the English word gait, like the way a person walks. And that's exactly what it is. It refers to the specific flow or rhythm of the writing. Much of the way was written or compiled during the Civil War when he was in Burgos. It has a staccato rhythm, it's urgent, it's direct, it completely avoids pietistic language, that sugary, overly flowery religious speak.
He calls a spade a spade.
He does. And he uses very earthly, concrete images. We already mentioned the spring. There's another famous one, the donkey at the water wheel.
The Noria.
Yes, the Noria. He talks about an old, tired donkey walking in endless circles, turning a wheel to draw water from a well. It's the very definition of monotonous, boring, repetitive work. You feel like you're going nowhere.
I think everyone can relate to that feeling.
But Escrivá says, look at the result. The water flows, the flowers in the garden bloom, the vegetables grow. The whole garden is green and fruitful because of that donkey's monotonous circle.
That is a message for every single person sitting in a cubicle right now, staring at a spreadsheet for the 10th time and thinking, does any of this matter?
He says, yes. If you do it for love, if you offer it up, that monotonous circle is watering the garden of the church. It is making fruitfulness possible even if you never see the fruits yourself.
That is, man, that lands. So we've covered the biography, the radical message of holiness for everyone, the theology of work, the importance of unity of life, and this deep foundational sense of being a child of God.
It really is a comprehensive, all-encompassing worldview.
Okay, let's wrap this up with our outro. What are the key takeaways for you? If someone listening forgets everything else, what are the few things they should really remember?
I'd say 4 things. First, sanctity is not for a special class of people. It is for you. The universal call to holiness is real.
Okay.
Second, your work, whatever it is, as long as it's honest, is the raw material for your holiness. Don't look for God somewhere else. Look for him in the papers on your desk or the tools in your hand.
2, got it.
Third, you are a child of God. That's not a metaphor, it's reality. So live with that confidence and that lack of fear.
And
Don't live a double life. Strive for unity. Be the same person in church on Sunday as you are in the boardroom or the classroom on Monday.
And the final, so what, for the listener today. Why does this matter in our world right now?
I think it removes the excuse. That's the hard part, really, but also the most liberating. It completely removes the excuse that I'm too busy for a spiritual life. Escrivá's message is, your busyness is the spiritual life. You don't need more time. You just need a different intention.
That's liberating, but it's also very challenging.
It puts the ball firmly in your court. There's nowhere to hide.
I want to leave the listener with a final thought, something that's derived from looking at this whole picture we've painted. We talked about the early Christians. They changed a pagan empire, an empire that was actively hostile to them, not by conquering it with armies, but by outliving and outloving their neighbors. They were the best citizens, the most honest merchants, the most loyal soldiers, but they had this secret fire inside them.
The quiet revolution.
Exactly. Escrivá's vision was essentially asking the question, what if that happened again? What if millions of ordinary people, the ones who aren't famous, who will never be in the history books, what if they all decided to turn the prose of their daily lives into poetry? What kind of quiet revolution would that spark in our world today?
It's a question worth pondering.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you on the next one.